With Selection Sunday almost a week away and March Madness right around the corner, I am back with another bracketology video where we take a look at the updated NCAA Tournament bracket projections and predict what would happen if it were to start today. But before we begin, if you enjoy the content, please consider dropping a like on the video and subscribing to the channel. But now, let's jump into it. And once again, I am back on ESPN taking a look at Joe Lunardi's updated bracketology projection, and jumping into it, our top overall seed is once again the Duke Blue Devils, and that's no surprise as they have not lost since our last update, so they stay as the top overall seed in the NCAA tournament right now. Then our last team in is New Mexico. I'm a bit surprised by this because they took a loss at home versus Colorado State this past week, but still seem to be in. Then our first team out is VCU, which makes sense because they did lose head-to-head to New Mexico, which it looks like that's the one thing holding them out of the field over the Lobos. But jumping into our bracket, you can see we have some movement. Utah State dropped down to an 8 seed. They've now lost 3 of their last 4 games after that blowout loss on the road at UNLV that they just suffered. Then you have UCLA, who jumped up a spot after that ranked win over Nebraska. You got UCF, who's on a 3-game losing streak to non-tournament teams right now. That's down a spot. Kansas is down a spot after that bad loss at Arizona State. We got Vanderbilt, who's also been dropping time and time again. They just took a loss at Kentucky and then barely beat a bad Ole Miss team. Then you got SMU, who's now down to an 11 seed and starting to creep into that bubble conversation after they have lost 3 straight in ACC play. Further down, we have Miami, that's up a spot. They jumped to a 7 seed and have won 7 of their last 8 games. Missouri, though, they dropped from a 9 to a 10 after that bad loss to Oklahoma. We got Ohio State back to a 10 seed now with that win over Purdue and then another one at Penn State. And it seems like the Buckeyes should be safely in the tournament now. Georgia is up a seed as well after that double-digit win over Alabama, which was really impressive to me. We got North Carolina going from a 6 to a 5, and they're currently on a 4-game winning streak, but the loss of Caleb Wilson that we just heard of could be bad for them come Selection Sunday. You got Wisconsin up to a 6 seed. They've moved and won 3 of their last 4 games. Texas down to an 11 seed, so now more in that bubble conversation after losing 3 of their last 4. Gonzaga, they moved up to a 3 seed, but hadn't played since that loss at St. Mary's, but just had a lot of movement around them, which got them there. Then you got BYU, who continues to drop. They're now down to a 7 seed, and they just seem to keep losing as they've lost 4 of their last 5. And then you got Texas A&M up a spot to a 10 seed after that win over Kentucky. But taking a look at the bubble, our last 4 buys right now are Ohio State, Texas A&M, Missouri, and Texas. And so a few teams I thought that were safely in, like Missouri and Texas, are now dropping back into that bubble conversation, but I still think they're going to make it. Then you got the last 4 in of Santa Clara, SMU, Indiana, and New Mexico. So even with losses from Indiana and New Mexico this past week, they are still in, but just barely hanging on. Then our first 4 out, VCU, Auburn, Virginia Tech, and Cincinnati. So Cincinnati has now moved into that first 4 out section and could get there with a strong showing in the Big 12 tournament. And then our next 4 out is Cal, San Diego State, Stanford, and Seton Hall. And so Seton Hall is now the last team in the next 4 out, and it's starting to feel like they're going to have to win the Big East tournament in order to make the NCAA tournament. But then lastly, looking at our multi-big conferences, we have the Big 10 and SEC still tied at 10, ACC and Big 12 both at 8 still, Big East, West Coast still at 3, and then the Mountain West at 2. But now let's go ahead and jump into our bracket and make our predictions. But before we get into our predictions, I wanted to give a quick shout out to the guys over at OddsGods who are sponsoring today's video. And if you're filling out a March Madness bracket this year, you have to check out their Bracket Lab tool. It's basically what if odds for the NCAA tournament. So as you fill in your bracket, the future odds update in real time based on your picks, and you can see how one decision changes the odds for your bracket. And they also have a ton of other features like their own ranking system, matchup predictions, and conference tournament odds and more. And right now, it's completely free to use. And honestly, it's one of the best and easiest ways I've seen to make well-educated decisions when filling out your bracket. So make sure to go and check it out at the link in the description of the video. But let's go ahead and use the Bracket Lab tool to make our predictions. All right, so first thing we have to do in the Bracket Lab tool is pick the winners of each of the play-in games in the first 4. And you have have the option to have it pick for you, but I'm going to go one by one quickly through each of these matchups and pick on who I think would win. So in the first matchup in the East, we have the SMU Mustangs taking on the Indiana Hoosiers, and right now the odds are in the favor of the Hoosiers. You have Lamar Wilkerson and Tucker DeFries, but they're going up against the SMU Mustangs, who I think have a better backcourt with Boopy Miller. I also like Jerome Pierre as well, so I'm actually going to go with the Mustangs to win in that one. Then in the South, we have Santa Clara taking on New Mexico. New Mexico is the last team in the field right now and could be on the outside looking in here very soon. Going up against the Broncos out of the WCC, who I really hope make the tournament. I like the Broncos a lot more in this matchup, so I'm going to be picking them. Then in the Midwest, we have the 16 seeds of Howard or Bethune-Cookman. Bethune-Cookman, a really big favorite in this one, so I'm going with them. And then in the South, it's Long Island and Tennessee State, and I'm going with Long Island to win in this one. So we can go ahead and jump into the bracket now. All right, so starting off in the East region, in our first matchup, we have Duke taking on Central Arkansas, and as we all know, 1 versus 16, the ones are going to be heavy favorites, and it looks like Duke has just about a 99% chance to win, so I am picking the Blue Devils in that matchup. Then we have Utah State taking on UCLA in our next matchup. I really like both of these teams. Utah State, though, has been struggling a bit there in the Mountain West. Then you have UCLA coming off the big win against Nebraska, so I'm actually going to be picking the Bruins to win and advance. I like Donovan Dent. I think he's playing better as of late. You also have a guy like Tyler Bilodeau, Eric Daly Jr. I think they have a bit more bodies than Utah State, so I like UCLA in that matchup. Then we have St. John's taking on Yale. Yale, the powerhouse of the Ivy League right now, but I do think St. John's would just be a bit too physical for Yale in this matchup, so I like the Johnnies to advance. I also think Zuby Ejiofor, Dylan Mitchell, and Bryce Hopkins there in the front court would be huge in this matchup and would just feast on the interior. But then we have Alabama taking on UNC Wilmington. In one of my previous videos, I had UNC Wilmington getting an upset in the first round, but this is not the matchup that they want. UNC Wilmington, though, they're massive, 10th tallest team in the country right now, but their big weakness is the pace of play that they play at, and we do know Alabama, one of the most up-tempo teams in the entire country, so I think it's be a horrible draw for the Seahawks out of UNC Wilmington. I think Alabama would just be able to get out and run, speed them up, and that is not UNCW's game, so I got the Crimson Tide advancing in this one. Then we have Kentucky taking on SMU in our next matchup. And SMU, like I mentioned, has really good guard play, but Kentucky, bit of a favorite here, 63% chance to win. I think the Wildcats have been playing a little better as of late. You got Otega Owe, who I definitely think is the best player in this matchup. I also like Kentucky's front court a lot better with Malachi Moreno, Diabate, Brandon Garrison. I think Kentucky has a bit more talent than SMU, and I think that would carry them at least to the round of 32. Then Iowa State taking on Troy. Troy, another upset watch team that I'm looking at that could win in the first round, but I'm not so sure in this matchup. Iowa State, though, they have been shaky as of late, but I think that core of Milan Momcilovic, Taman Lipsey, and Joshua Jefferson would help them get it done in this matchup against Troy. I also think Troy is a bit undersized, but they do have a really good player in Victor Valdez, who's 6'7", and could be one of the better passing bigs, and that might be something that Iowa State could struggle with, but we all know Cyclones, they have great defense, and so I think they'd be able to get past the Trojans here, so give me Iowa State to advance. Then we got Miami taking on Missouri. Missouri was one of the hotter teams, but then has cooled off as of late, but Miami, winners of 7 of their last 8. Malik Renew just looks like a dominant player on the interior, and I think Missouri would have a tough time guarding him. I would really like that matchup, though, between Mark Mitchell and Malik Renew, but I also like what they have in the backcourt for the Hurricanes. You got Trey Donaldson. You also have the combo of freshmen in Dante Allen, Sheldon Henderson. You also have True Washington, who's been playing great also. I just like the weapons and the pieces that Jay Lucas has for Miami in his first year there, so I got Miami advancing in this one. And then lastly, we have Michigan State taking on Wright State. Michigan State, 90% chance to win this matchup, and I think Tom Izzo and the Spartans get it done and advance to the second round. Jumping back up, though, to the top of the round of 32, we have Duke taking on UCLA in our first matchup, and I think Duke just be too powerful in this one. Cameron Boozer, Patrick Ngungba down low. Isaiah Evans is playing great. You also have Caleb Foster. You got Caden Boozer. Dame Sarr is going to be the X factor for this team. He's been playing extremely well as of late. If he can continue hitting threes like he has been, I think that's going to be huge for this team to advance. You also have Darren Harris, who has been playing good off the bench for them as well. Duke is just rolling right now and looks like one of, if not the best teams in the country. So I have to have the Blue Devils advancing to the Sweet 16. Then we have St. John's taking on Alabama. In this one, the odds are in Alabama's favorites. So 56% chance for Alabama to win. We've already seen this matchup early in the year in the Garden, and Alabama was able to get that win. And previously, I probably would have picked St. John's with how they've been playing. Also, Alabama just took a loss to Georgia, so that could be something that we're looking at. But I am going to be sticking with the Crimson Tide for the sole purpose of guards win in March, and this backcourt is way better than what St. John's has. St. John's is still looking for that point guard. At times it's Dylan Darling, but at times it's not. And with Alabama, you know who you got. You got LeBaron Philon, Aiden Holloway, Latrell Reitzel, and more. I really like what this Alabama team has been doing as of late, and so I got Alabama. Moving on to the second weekend, then we have Kentucky and Iowa State. Iowa State, 71% chance to win this matchup against the Wildcats, and I think they do. I really like what Iowa State has done all season. If you look at their season as a whole, it's been an amazing season for the Cyclones, but it does seem like in March, this is where they do feather out, but I do believe this team is going to go further than they have in the past couple of seasons, so I do have Iowa State advancing to my Sweet 16. Then we have Miami, Florida, and Michigan State. And although I really want to pick Miami and Jay Lucas to make it to the Sweet 16 in his first season with the Hurricanes, and I think they have a shot in this one, I think Michigan State's playing like one of the better teams in the country right now. They've been extremely solid. Jeremy Fears Jr. looks like one of, if not the best point guards in all of college basketball. Cohen Carr has been out there. The front court's playing better with Jackson Kohler and Carson Cooper. You also have some of the freshmen stepping up for this Michigan State team and hitting shots. I like Sparty right now and what they've been doing, so I got them advancing to the Sweet 16. So now to start the second weekend, we do have our 1 versus 4 matchup of Duke taking on Alabama, and this is where Alabama could get really hot and cause Duke some troubles, but it just seems like all season long, even when teams are hot against Duke, they have some sort of answer, and I think they have an answer once again. So I got Duke advancing to the Elite Eight, where they're taking on either Iowa State or Michigan State. And in this one, it actually looks like Iowa State, the 3 seed, is the favorite over Michigan State right now, but it is close, 52% to 48%. But I'm actually going to be going against that. I'm going with Michigan State to advance to the Elite Eight. 2 really good defenses in the Cyclones and in the Spartans, but I think Michigan State just looks like the better team right now. They've also been playing better as of late. Iowa State's dropped a couple. I think Jeremy Fears Jr. has a better game than Taman Lipsey, and he's able to do more on the offensive end, and he's able to help Michigan State get to the Elite Eight. So in our Elite Eight matchup, we actually see a rematch from something we saw in the regular season of Duke taking on Michigan State. In the first matchup, Duke was able to go on the road and win at Michigan State. This one would be in a neutral, but in favor of Duke in terms of the location, and I think that helps the Blue Devils a lot, and I think they're able to get the win once again. Cameron Boozer is just too much for this Michigan State team. They don't have an answer for him, and the Duke Blue Devils are getting to the Final Four once again. All right, now jumping on over to the other side of the bracket, we have the UConn Huskies as the 1 seed here in the South region, and in their first round matchup, they're taking on Long Island, who I picked to win in the first 4, and again, I have UConn winning this one, 97% chance, 1 versus 16. I just don't see the Huskies getting knocked off in this one. Then we have St. Louis taking on Iowa. St. Louis, out of the A10, has had one of the better seasons in the country for any mid-major. However, they have been falling off a little recently with those losses to Rhode Island and Dayton on the road, but they are going up against the Iowa team that leans heavily on their point guard and Bennett Sturts. I definitely think Iowa has the edge in the backcourt in this one with Bennett Sturts, but I do think St. Louis is just a bit too much for this team. They have been dominant this entire season out of the A10 and have played and beat a lot of good teams. They got a legit 9-man rotation, one of the best shooting teams in the country, shoot over 40% from three. I think they could give Iowa all kinds of troubles. So I'm going with the upset in terms of the odds and picking the Billikens to advance to face UConn in the second round. Then we got Tennessee taking on Stephen F. Austin. Stephen F. Austin would be the odd bid here, coming up against a Tennessee team that has Jacoby Gillespie. They got Nate Ament, Felix Okpara. They have a lot of guys in this one. I do think the talent of this team might be a little too much for Stephen F. Austin. Also, for Tennessee, we know they're going to bring it on the defensive end. They're also a really big team, which could give trouble for a team like the Lumberjacks and Stephen F. Austin. And I think Nate Ament, and specifically Jacoby Gillespie, I think he is going to be the best point guard in this game, and he's going to help get this team to the second round. Then we have Virginia taking on North Dakota State. Virginia was one of my favorite teams in the country, and I thought they would be able to compete against Duke, maybe not win at Cameron Indoor, but I thought they'd be able to put up more of a fight than they did, and that one just got out of hand really quick. But I do think that was just one game and said more about Duke than it did Virginia. Virginia still has solid pieces all around. You got really good guard play with Dallin Hall, Chance Mallory. You got shooters with Jakari White, Malik Thomas. Then you got a big man, Tyster Ritter. You also have Johan Grunlow. They bring off other bigs as well. This team has a lot of pieces, and so I do think they'd be able to overpower North Dakota State in this one. But I also think Virginia is a candidate to go on a bit of run here. Then we have Louisville taking on Santa Clara, and this could be one where I pick a 6-11 upset. We usually see at least one 11 seed win, and a lot of times since the first four was introduced, we've seen an 11 seed get at least to the round of 32. And Santa Clara is a team that could definitely do that out of the WCC. And Louisville is a matchup for them where I think they actually might be able to take advantage of because of the inconsistency we've seen from the Cardinals on the offensive end. And then they're not necessarily the best on the defensive end. Right now, odds are definitely in Louisville's favor, and they do have probably the better backcourt with Michael Brown Jr. and Ryan Conwell, but those guys have been inconsistent at times, and I'm starting to lean heavier and heavier as I talk to Santa Clara, so I am going to be picking the Broncos to advance and get the upset and move on to the round of 32. Then in our next matchup of 3 versus 14, we got Purdue taking on Broadley out of the Missouri Valley Conference, so Belmont was upset earlier, and they are no longer going to be in the NCAA tournament. That was the favorite by far out of the Missouri Valley Conference, and one of the teams I thought was the better mid-majors and was one of the upset picks I have been eyeing, but now it's Bradley and not Belmont, and so they're going up against Purdue, and I don't think Bradley has the same firepower as Belmont, so I got Purdue. I don't think Braden Smith is going to lose in the first round either. He's not going to let the Boilermakers do that, and so he'll be getting to the round of 32. And then we got Villanova taking on Texas A&M. Villanova, really good to see them back in the tournament, especially after the dark days there with Kyle Neptune for a little bit. And then going up against the Texas A&M team who has played themselves back into the bubble. They were safely in, but hasn't been as solid as of late. We obviously know what they did early on in SEC play, but I do think that was more scheduling than anything for them. And so when you're looking at the odds, Villanova actually the slight underdogs, even though they're the 7th seed, but I do like this Villanova team a lot. They got a Caden Lewis, who I think has been one of the more underrated freshmen in the entire country, and he's leading their backcourt, and I think he's going to help Villanova get the win and advance to the next round, and they'll be taking on either Florida or Merrimack, and you know where I'm going with this. It has to be the Florida Gators. They have been one of, if not the hottest teams in the country right now, and have been playing their best basketball as of late. Didn't take a loss in the month of February and are continuing that into March, it seems, and I think Florida gets the win, and Todd Golden and the team make it to the round of 32. Then jumping into the top of the round of 32, we got UConn taking on St. Louis, and this is actually a place where I'm going to be picking an upset. I'm going to be picking St. Louis to get the upset over UConn and Danny Hurley in advance to the Sweet 16. I think I like UConn more than most this season, but we definitely have seen them play down to competition, and I think St. Louis is better than a lot of teams that they have faced in the Big East this year. If they put up a game like they did against St. John's when they played at the Garden, or against some of these other teams, especially like how they played against Creighton recently, if they play a game like that and St. Louis is coming and you got one of the best shooting teams in the country, also one of the more fast-paced teams, I think St. Louis could be a problem for UConn. Also, St. Louis is a lot deeper than UConn. UConn's rotation is not that deep, and St. Louis can go 9 to 10 deep. So I'm picking Josh Schertz and the Billikens to win and get the upset and advance to the Sweet 16. They'll be taking on either Tennessee or Virginia. Normally I would go Virginia here, but that Duke game, I still like them, but that scared me a little bit. I think Tennessee might have more weapons when it comes to star power in Jacoby Gillespie. I think he's definitely the best guard that would be in that game. I think Nate Ament would be the X factor in this one. He would have to play solid, but for Virginia, I don't necessarily know who's going to lock him down. So I do like the matchup for Nate Ament and the Volunteers. So I'm going to be picking Tennessee to advance to the Sweet 16, where we got an 8-5 matchup against St. Louis. Then you got Purdue taking on Santa Clara, and although Santa Clara got the upset in the first round, I do think they'd be able to compete with the Boilermakers, but Trey Kaufman-Renn in that front court I think would be a bit too much for him, and I got Purdue advancing. Then Villanova taking on Florida, and I think this is where the Wildcats run comes to an end. Nice to have them back in the tournament, get to the round of 32, but that Florida front court would absolutely punish an undersized Villanova team, and then obviously the way that backcourt has been playing as of late, it's hard to go against them right now. So we got St. Louis going up against Tennessee in the Sweet 16. And again, I'd really like this matchup. I think Tennessee definitely better on the defensive end and would be the heavy favorites for this one, almost 60% to 40% for St. Louis. But there's something about this St. Louis team that I'm liking a lot right now. You got Robbie Avila in the post who can also step out. That's going to force guys like Felix Okpara and those rim protectors to step out, which could open some driving lanes for the guards on St. Louis. I like the depth that this team brings. When it comes to March, I think depth definitely doesn't hurt. And so I'm going with St. Louis again to get the upset and advance to the Elite Eight. And then we got Purdue taking on Florida. I would really like this matchup. You got two really good front courts in Purdue with Oscar Clough, Trey Kaufman-Renn, and then Daniel Jacobson off the bench. And then with Florida, Alex Condon, Ruben Chinyelu, both have been playing amazing as of late. It was Ruben Chinyelu early on, double-double machine. Then Alex Condon has come on as of late and has been averaging about like 20 and 7, it feels like. And Ruben Chinyelu still doing what he does. Then you obviously have a guy like Thomas Houck, who is this team's best player, but just seems like he's getting overshadowed game after game by different people because people continue to step up for this team. And then obviously Boogie Flan, Xavier Lee, Urban Klapsar have been great. I still got to stick with Florida to get the win. And then in the Elite Eight, we got Florida taking on St. Louis, and I do think this is where the Billikens run comes to an end, and the Florida Gators are just too big for this St. Louis team, and they get the win and advance to the Final Four. Let's move down to our next region, where we have the Midwest region, where Michigan is our #1 overall seed in this one, and they're going up against another team that we picked in the first four in Bethune-Cookman. And Michigan not going to have any problems in this one. Too big, too strong, too fast for Bethune-Cookman, and they'll advance to the round of 32, and they're taking on either Clemson or UCF. Clemson have been struggling as of late, but then it seems like they've turned it around a bit. You also got UCF, who seems like they've been struggling recently as of late. So two teams that really haven't been playing their best basketball, played their best basketball, it seems like, in the middle of the season. So in this one, I am going to be going with Clemson. I think the defense from Clemson could give UCF some trouble. I also think they're going to have some guys step up like Whaling, maybe Hunter as well, and would be able to get some buckets in timely possessions for them. It's able to get them to hold on and beat the Golden Knights and advance to the round of 32. Then we got Arkansas taking on USF. USF out of the American, one of the teams that I really like right now. A guy in Isaiah Nelson, you need to know his name. He's going to be the American Player of the Year. He also might be an NBA draft pick. Then you got guys like Joseph Pinion on that team that can shoot it. They got Wes Ennis on that team that can shoot it. You got Brown on the guard spot. Really good guard trio from the Bulls there at South Florida, but they're going up against an Arkansas team that has a guy by the name of Darius Acuff, who is or might be one of the best guards in the entire country. Honestly, has been playing his way into the National Player of the Year conversations, and although Cameron Boozer is that, he might be the best guard of the year, and he's done so much for this Arkansas team, and it just seems like they've stepped it up as of late. The depth is a concern, and I'll continue saying that for me for the Razorbacks, but Darius Acuff, with the way he's playing, he's going to get this team past the round of 64 and into the round of 32. So give me the Razorbacks. Then we got Kansas taking on Liberty. Liberty, really, really good shooting team. I really like the Flames and what they do on the offensive end. You also have a guy like Zach Cleveland that's just a do-it-all forward for them, but their issue is going to be the size mismatch. In Kansas, not necessarily the biggest team, but you got a guy like Bryson Tiller. You also have a center like Flory Badunga. And if Badunga can punish Arizona like he did when they played at Allen Fieldhouse, Badunga can punish this Liberty team. And I haven't even mentioned Darren Peterson yet. It's going to be Kansas for me to get the win and move to the round of 32. Then we have a really fun matchup that I want to talk about, and that is Vanderbilt taking on Miami, Ohio. Miami, Ohio, last remaining undefeated team in the country right now. A lot of people have had questions. If they lose a game in the regular season and then lose in the conference tournament, do they get in? I think they do with what they've done. They won 30 games in the regular season. They deserve to be in my opinion. But you're going up against a Vanderbilt team that hasn't been playing their best basketball. They started 16-0 on the season and have definitely been sliding since then. But Vanderbilt still has a guy like Tyler Tanner. You still got a Duke Miles, Tyler Nickel, Devin McLaughlin. They got guys on this team, but they are slightly undersized, which is big for Miami, Ohio. But for Miami, Ohio, they're like the definition of offense at the mid-major level. They've had 9 different players score 20-plus points in a game this season. They shoot nearly 40% from the 3. They're over 62% from 2. They got a lot of great spacing and movement, and what Coach Steele has done there has been remarkable. I think this team has been more physical and more active as of late. And so I do think the defense has improved also. So I'm going to be picking the upset here and pick Miami, Ohio over Vanderbilt. I think Vanderbilt is one of the teams that they would really like to get matched up against, and it could be a good matchup for them. And so I got the Red Hawks advancing to the round of 32. Then we got Nebraska taking on Navy. Nebraska just took a tough loss to UCLA, but they still have had a great season. I really like the guard play for him from Sam Hoiberg, Jamarcus Lawrence out there, and then you obviously have the sharpshooter and Price Sanford. Down low, they got Rink Mask. I think they're just going to be too big for this Navy team. Navy, though, really successful season. Awesome to see what they've been doing there, but I got the Cornhuskers advancing. Then we got St. Mary's taking on Ohio State. So Ohio State was out a few weeks ago. Then they played their way, and now they're seemingly no longer on the bubble and safely in. I love what the Buckeyes have been doing. You got Bruce Thornton that's going to be playing in his first ever NCAA tournament this season, going up against the St. Mary's team that just knocked off Gonzaga in their last regular season game in the WCC. St. Mary's are the heavy favorites. I also think St. Mary's does have really good size, but Bruce Thornton and John Mobley are built for March. I think Ohio State might have the edge in the backcourt, and so I'm going to be picking the upset and picking the Buckeyes over the Gales to advance to the round of 32. Also, St. Mary's just can't seem to get past the round of 64, and if they do, they can't really get past the round of 32 recently, so I do like Ohio State in this one. Then we got Houston taking on ETSU, and this kind of feels like a 1 versus 16. I know it is a 2 versus 15, so there is more of a chance, but the Cougars and Kelvin Sampson are not going to be losing in the round of 64. They're advancing to the round of 32. Jumping back up to the top of our round of 32, where we got Michigan taking on Clemson. Michigan in this matchup, too much offense, too much size. Clemson is just not going to be able to keep up with them. I think even if Michigan just scores their average amount of points, I don't know if Clemson can get there. So give me the Wolverines to advance to the Sweet 16. Then we got Arkansas taking on Kansas. Arkansas as a 5 seed is a favored in this one. And this is a really hard game to pick because when it comes to this Kansas team, we just don't know what we're going to get. They have had a roller coaster all season, not only with the Darren Peterson injury storyline, but also with just the way that they have played. I'm going to be picking Kansas to get the win. So in terms of the odds, it would actually be an upset because I'm trusting Darren Peterson. I think he'd be the best player in this game. Although Darius Acuff may have something to say about that. I think it'd be a really close matchup, but right now I'm leaning Kansas just slightly, and mainly it's due to the depth issue from Arkansas. But if Arkansas can get a guy like Carter Knox back, or if they can just play a little more guys that I'm comfortable with, then I might be picking the Razorbacks in this one. But I got the Jayhawks advancing. Then we got Miami, Ohio taking on Nebraska. I do think this could be a game where we see Miami, Ohio actually get the win and advance over Nebraska. But Nebraska, I have them getting their first win ever in NCAA tournament history. I'm going to have them getting their second one as well. I think the size could be a little bit of an issue for Miami, Ohio. I think rink mask could give this team some problems. I also think Nebraska could match the shooting of Miami, Ohio. And then also you got really good guard play and good guard defense as well in the backcourt for Nebraska. And I think that those could be pretty big for the Cornhuskers to get the win over the Red Hawks. Then we got Ohio State taking on Houston. I actually do believe that Ohio State does have a way to get to the Sweet 16. I think they have that much talent, but Houston got guys that played in the national championship last year in Emmanuel Sharp, Milos Uzan, and JoJo Tugler. You obviously have the stud freshmen in Kingston Flemings and Chris Sinak. I think that's enough to get you to the Sweet 16. So give me the Cougars to advance. Then we got Michigan taking on Kansas to start off our Sweet 16. And Michigan, I think the front court would be too much for this Kansas front court, although Kansas was able to keep up and actually dominate Arizona's front court at times, but that was at Allen Fieldhouse. This is on a neutral site. I think Yaxel Lindenborg, Morez Johnson Jr., and Ade Mara are able to get it done, but this is where I do think the LJ Kaysen injury is going to be a concern for me. LJ Kaysen, in my opinion, best backup guard in the entire country. He was playing really good for this Wolverines team, and them missing him in the NCAA tournament is going to hurt, and I think it's going to be hurt more than a lot of people think. I also believe that you're going to have to rely on a guy like Elliot Cadeau, Namari Burnett, and Roddy Gale, but those guys aren't necessarily like point guards. Elliot Cadeau is really going to be the only point guard on this team. I guess Yaxel can play point forward at times. I still like Michigan in the matchup, but I do think this is where the injury of LJ Kaysen is going to start affecting the Wolverines. Then we have Nebraska taking on Houston, and this could be a really good matchup. Nebraska obviously has the shooting. They also have really good defense. I think their defense has been underrated. And then obviously you got a Houston team that's one of the best teams in the country, top 15 in both offensive and defensive efficiency, according to Kim Palm. And I think they're getting back on track after that 3-game skid. So I am going to be going with Houston to advance and face Michigan in the Elite Eight. And so in this Elite Eight matchup, I think Michigan's front court is definitely better than the Houston front court, but I like the guard play when it comes to Houston. And so for me personally, I'm actually going to be trusting the guards a bit more and going with Houston to upset Michigan and advance to the Final Four. And moving on to our last region, we have the West region, where we see the Arizona Wildcats as our #1 overall seed. And in their first round matchup, they're taking on UMBC, and much of the same. I got Arizona as a 1 seed advancing to the round of 32. Then we have Georgia taking on NC State. Georgia just got that big win over Alabama, instilled some confidence in me because they were struggling recently. And then NC State, they have been really up and down as of late. Obviously, we saw when they played Duke at home, got ran out of the building. But this NC State team is a team that I think can make an upset and make some noise in March, but in the 8-9 matchup, I'm not really liking them that much, so I'm actually going to be going with Georgia to advance over Will Wade and the Wolfpack to advance to the round of 32. I think that offense would be moving. I do think this would be a high-scoring game. It might be the first team to 90, even 100 in this one, but I got Georgia after what I saw against Alabama, gave me some more confidence in the Bulldogs, and I got them advancing to the next round. Now we got North Carolina taking on High Point. Now, if I were to film this video earlier, I would have been picking North Carolina, but we just got news. Caleb Wilson suffered another hand injury, and he is now out for the rest of the year. Season-ending surgery required for him, which is very unfortunate. I'm extremely sad that we won't see Caleb Wilson in the NCAA tournament. We also won't see Caleb Wilson in the ACC tournament as well. And so that's a bit upsetting to me because I really would have liked to have seen him. But you got a North Carolina team that has been playing well without him. They got some really solid wins. Got a win over Clemson as well. But going up against a High Point team out of the Big South that I think a lot of people should tune in and watch. This is a really, really fun team to watch. They have a really fun style of play. So I'm going a bit back and forth. So with UNC, they're going to have the size, right? They're going to have the size with Henry Vasar, but they lose a lot with missing Caleb Wilson in the front court. And I think that is going to be one of the things that actually is going to help High Point, because High Point isn't necessarily the biggest team, but they definitely get after you. They're one of the more active teams on the defensive end. They love to switch it up when it comes to, they'll go to a full court man press at times. They'll trap as well. They also are just one of those teams that are just, from the time the ball tips, it's just absolute chaos, but I love that from them. I also think this High Point team could be better than they were last year, and they were one of the bigger upset picks that people were picking, although it didn't turn out against Purdue. So I'm going to be picking High Point in an upset over North Carolina for the sole reason that they don't have Caleb Wilson, and I think High Point can make those guards uncomfortable because I don't trust them necessarily. Seth Trimble's the only one I do trust, but when it comes to his offensive game, I think you can live with him scoring 20 and still win, so I got High Point advancing in this one. Then we have Texas Tech taking on Cal Baptist. Texas Tech had a big injury of their own, obviously, with JT Toppin. He's out for the season as well, but the Red Raiders were able to honestly kind of pick up where they left off after he went out in that Arizona State game. They took the loss there, but then they got some big wins without him. I am liking what I'm seeing from Christian Anderson. He had a big role to start the year, but he has to take on an even bigger role now that Toppin's out, and it kind of seems like he's been doing that, but it seems even more so like the guys around have stepped up, and that's what I've been asking from this Texas Tech team even before JT Toppin was there. You got Donovan Atwell, who's shooting the lights out. Obviously, you got Lawan Watts, who has showed in games this season he can step up and be that third option, so now he'll need to be that second option maybe. You got a guy like Jamal Mosley who's been getting after it, Luke Bamboya who's been playing well, Tyree Bryan, he kind of was MIA a bit in the middle of the season. He's coming alive as of late. I got Texas Tech beating Cal Baptist, but I also think Texas Tech has a higher ceiling than most think without JT Toppin. But then we got Wisconsin taking on Texas in our 6 versus 11 matchup. In this one, Texas, they've been struggling a little bit, dropping a few games here, but now we got Wisconsin, who's got a backcourt of John Blackwell and Nick Boyd, one of the better backcourts in the country. Again, like I keep mentioning, I trust guards, and I think Wisconsin has the better guards. So give me the Badgers to advance over Texas. Then we got Gonzaga taking on UC Irvine. Gonzaga, it's looking less and less likely like we're going to see a Braden Huff return, but Gonzaga has played solid without him. Not as great as they would with him, and definitely would have a higher ceiling with him, but without him, I do think they can get past UC Irvine. I think they got the size to get past him, and I think Graham Eastgay is definitely going to be the best player in the front court. You also have a guard in Mario St. Superi, who's one that's going to be interesting to watch to see how he plays in his first ever NCAA tournament as a freshman. But you also have a Braden Smith who's been there, Tyon Grant Foster. They got some guys that can help them get a few wins this season in March. Then we got BYU taking on TCU. BYU, they have been struggling ever since that Richie Saunders injury news came out, and he's out for the season for them. And AJ Debinsa, he's doing just about everything he can for this team, but he can score 30, but if they can't play any defense, they are not going to be able to go that far in the NCAA tournament. And they're going up against a TCU team that just kind of seems like the giant killer right now. They got the win over Florida, got a win over Wisconsin earlier in the season. They took Michigan to the brink. They got some big wins in Big 12 play. And I think with the way BYU is playing right now, I'm actually going to be picking TCU, which is really sad to say because I do not want to see A.J. Dubanta to be a one game and out in the NCAA tournament. But right now, it looks like he might be. Then you got Illinois taking on Portland State. Illinois, by far, one of my favorite teams still. I know they've been struggling as of late, but I do trust that offense. I think Keaton Wagler is going to get it back. And this team, they've been injured a little bit recently, and so you got to get those guys time to gel back together, and they got them. So I got Illinois advancing over Portland State to the round of 32. Now jumping up to the top of the second round for us in the West region, we got Arizona taking on Georgia. Now this Georgia team, they can score, and that could be a little scary for Arizona at times, but Arizona consistently throughout the season has just shown that they can play any style of basketball that they need to and can win, and so I got to go with the Wildcats. Then we got Texas Tech taking on High Point. This could be a team in High Point that we see make it to a Sweet 16 if this is how the bracket shakes out, because they're playing back-to-back teams with star players out. But like I mentioned, I think Texas Tech's ceiling is higher than most expect. I also trust this backcourt of the Red Raiders more than I would the Tar Heels backcourt, and which is what scared me with the way that High Point plays on the defensive end. So I'm going to be picking Texas Tech to get the win over High Point. Then we have Wisconsin taking on the Gonzaga Bulldogs, and this is one where I think Gonzaga should be scared if this matchup came up, because those guards could give them absolute buckets. You also have a guy like Austin Rapp. You got a Nolan Winter. They have other guys on that Wisconsin team that I think could step up, especially on the defensive end for them. So although Gonzaga is heavy favorites, I'm going to be picking Wisconsin in this one. And then we got TCU taking on Illinois. TCU, like I mentioned, they're like the giant killers right now. They have beat a lot of really good teams, but they've also lost some games that they probably shouldn't have. But then going up against an Illinois team that I just maybe in a blind way just trust a little too much. I love the roster that Brad Underwood has put together. I love the offense. And I think if the defense can just get a little better, I think this team has the talent to make a run. So I got Illini. I'm trusting them to make it to the Sweet 16. Then we got Arizona taking on Texas Tech. Arizona and Texas Tech obviously played in the Big 12, and Arizona is just going to be too big for this team. Also, the loss of JT Toppin, I don't think this front court for Texas Tech is going to be able to do anything on the offensive end. I think it's going to get really hard for Christian Anderson to get downhill and do anything, because you're just going to have a Mo Kriavas or a Toby Awaka down there. Obviously, Arizona now has Koa Pete back from injury. You got a Jaden Bradley, who is one of the most clutch players in the country. Anthony Dell'Orso has been shooting it well. And I haven't even mentioned Braden Burries, who has been playing like one of their best players, maybe their best player as of late. This Arizona team is loaded right now, and it's hard to pick against them. So I got the Wildcats advancing over Texas Tech. Then we got Illinois taking on Wisconsin. And I think this is where Wisconsin run comes to an end. I'm trusting Illinois with that offense to just do a little more than what Wisconsin can and get to the Elite Eight. So we got Illinois taking on Arizona in this one, and I do think this might be where Illinois' run comes to an end, though. Arizona, too big in the front court. I think their offense can keep up with them, and although Arizona doesn't shoot the three necessarily, and Illinois could hurt them there, Arizona can't hit it. It's just they don't necessarily shoot that many threes because they don't have to. It seems like this team can get to the rim at will, and I don't know if that front court of Illinois would be able to hold up against what Arizona has. So give me the Wildcats advancing to the Final Four. All right, jumping down to our Final Four, we have Duke taking on Florida, and then Arizona taking on Houston. So in our first matchup of Duke and Florida, this is a rematch of what we saw earlier in the year, where Florida went on the road to Cameron Indoor and lost by a single point. And remember, that was back when Florida was not the same Florida team that they are right now. You had Xavier Lee and Boogie Flange struggling. Urban Klavzar hadn't really broken out yet. Brown wasn't even playing for them, basically. Then you had Thomas Houck, who was doing what Thomas Houck does, but Alex Condon and Ruben Chinyulu were not the same versions of themselves that they are now. But then you're going up against Duke, And Cameron Boozer and this team is not the same team they were then either. Patrick Ngungba's look great. Isaiah Evans is scoring the ball better. You also have Darren Harris, Nicholas Hemenia coming off the bench playing really reliable minutes. Same with Caden Boozer. I think Caleb Foster has been looking better. And then, like I mentioned earlier, I think Dame Sarr is the X factor for this team. He plays incredible defense there on the wing or for a guard. But then it's his offense that I think is going to be the determining factor. So, going back and forth on this one, I really like what I've seen from Duke, but I actually think I prefer the Florida backcourt, which might be crazy to say from what we saw earlier in the season. This team also is shooting better from three. They shot 36% in February. They've gotten it up to over 31% as a team on the season. I just think Florida right now is the hottest team in the country, and so I'm going to be picking the Gators to win and advance to the national championship game. And they'll be taking on either Arizona or Houston. So we got two Big 12 teams here facing off in our Final Four. Kelvin Sampson trying to get back to the national title game to revenge himself and them blowing that lead against Florida last year. But they're going up against a juggernaut in the Arizona Wildcats. And I think this might be where the Houston front court actually starts to hurt them. And what I mean by that is front court last year for Houston had a guy in Jawan Roberts, and then obviously you had JoJo Tugler, but you also had Francis there. So they had a three-headed monster there for Houston. But you had a guy in Jawan Roberts that you could give the ball to, and he can make something happen. With the front court this season for Houston, you can't do that with JoJo Tugler, and you can't do that with Chris Sinak. Chris Sinak is more of a spot-up shooter than anything right now, or just dump it off and dunk it. Kind of the same with JoJo Tugler. He's a big lob threat, but I'm not seeing them do anything in the post, and I think that's going to be an issue for them because you got these guards that can do a lot, but they're getting to the mid-range, honestly not necessarily settling for the best shots at time, and then going up against an Arizona team that it seems like whoever they play, they just get what they want. Obviously, we've seen this happen in the regular season. Arizona got the win. I think Arizona would just be too much for Houston once again, and Houston falls short. They make it back to a Final Four, but not to the national championship game because that's Arizona that gets there. So then we get the Wildcats taking on the Gators, and if you remember, this is another rematch of what we saw earlier in the season, and I think that just goes to show what great non-conference matchups we had, and we probably didn't even realize it because this is a game that we saw on opening night that started the season where Koa Pete went crazy and Arizona beat the Gators. And I don't know if that would happen again, though, because like I mentioned, for Florida against Duke, this is definitely not the same Florida team that we saw on the opening night. And sometimes Florida was handling Arizona, especially in that first half. And then obviously in the second half, Koa Pete and the Wildcats took over and went on a run. But in this one, I think it'd be a really good matchup once again, like we saw. Front courts, two of the best, probably two of the top three front courts in the nation. I do think Florida's is number one. I think Arizona might be the third behind Michigan. Then in the backcourt, I probably lean a little bit on Arizona. I do like Braden Burries and Jaden Bradley. They're probably slightly better than a Boogie Flan and Xavier Lee right now. And then you also have the X factor for Arizona in a guy like Ivan Karchenkov. He might be able to lock down Thomas Houck. That'd be a really good matchup. But for some reason, with the way this Florida team plays, I might be leaning them, but I am going out really back and forth. And actually, as I'm talking about it, I'm talking myself a little more into Arizona. Reason being, I think they have a little more depth, and they kind of have some pieces that can counter just about everything that Florida does. So I'm going to be picking Arizona in this one, and they get the win once again over Florida, and they become national champions. But that wraps it up for today's video. Let me know your thoughts on this bracketology update and my predictions in the comments down below. Also, if you enjoyed the content, don't forget to drop a like on the video and subscribe to the channel. Thank you so much for all your support, and I'll see you in the next one.